When Pastor Joel Osteen unleashed a harsh speech calling President Donald Trump a demagogue and criminal against God, he believed he would receive applause from millions of viewers watching. But what happened next stunned the entire United States. Trump's reaction on live television was not anger, but a sharp counterattack based on facts and completely devastating. The 47th president not only defended himself, he also reversed the entire narrative, exposing the hypocrisy hidden behind the smile of America's most famous pastor. Houston lit up that night. The cameras were rolling, reporters whispering, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. Everyone thought this would be a normal religious dialogue, but what happened next shocked the nation. An American icon of faith began to crumble right before their eyes. The stage lights shone down on the center of the Houston auditorium, where thousands of spectators held their breath watching. The words "Faith and Leadership Summit" glowed brightly behind, between the American flag and a silver cross. On stage, two men sat facing each other, President Donald J. Trump and Pastor Joel Osteen. They were invited to discuss faith and leadership, but within the first few minutes, everyone understood this wasn't a discussion. This was a confrontation. Osteen spoke first, his voice even and full of confidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "faith cannot exist in the shadow of arrogance. A true leader must bow before God, not before power." Then he turned to Trump, his eyes like a blade. "You have forgotten that, Mr. President. You speak of God, but act as if you are God. You are a demagogue, a criminal, not only to the law, but to the spirit of this nation." The auditorium buzzed with murmurs, then fell silent. Trump sat straight, hands clasped in front of him. He looked at Osteen like a hunter observing prey pushing itself into a trap. "Joel," he replied, his voice low and slow, "I didn't come here to hear a hypocritical sermon. If you want to talk about faith, we'll talk, but don't preach to me about humility while you live in a golden palace." Osteen raised an eyebrow, trying to keep his smile. "I don't live for myself, Mr. President. I live to lead others to the light." Trump leaned forward, his eyes not leaving his opponent. "Light, or just stage lights reflecting off your diamond ring. People don't need sermons, Joel. They need truth." The atmosphere in the hall grew thick. Osteen was about to continue, but Trump raised his hand to stop him. "You call me a criminal," Trump said slowly, "but tonight, America itself will hear who is truly betraying their trust." The auditorium fell silent. All eyes focused on the two men on stage, one holding power, one holding faith. And in that moment, everyone knew the panel had turned into a trial. The truth was about to speak. Osteen took a deep breath, trying to keep his voice calm after the unexpected counterattack. He smiled faintly, leaning back in his chair as if he was still in control. "I didn't come here to argue," he said, his voice warm, honed through thousands of sermons. "I came here to remind America that love and humility are what God wants us to hold on to. God doesn't judge anyone. He forgives everyone, including you, Mr. President." His words echoed through the microphone, smooth as always when he preached to tens of thousands of followers. He smiled, the smile that had once made the entire Lakewood church congregation burst into tears. "I'm not perfect," he continued, "but I was chosen by God to spread love, to lead people to the light." Trump remained seated, eyes staring straight ahead, his hands loosely clenched on the table. He tilted his head, the light shining through his blonde hair, making his face hard as steel. "Light," he said slowly, "is a very interesting thing, Joel, because light can also expose what you're trying to hide." The entire auditorium shifted slightly. Trump pulled a stack of printed papers from his folder and placed them on the table. The sound of paper hitting wood rang out sharply. "You talk about humility," he continued, his voice clear, "but your financial reports tell a different story. 3 mansions, total value $12 million, a private Gulfstream GIV jet, and personal income of nearly $40 million a year, mostly from books, TV rights, and charity funds." Charity funds. "Joel, what charity fund buys a Patek Philippe watch?" Osteen flinched slightly, but tried to stay calm. "Those are gifts, Mr. President. I don't keep them for myself. I use those resources to serve the community, to inspire others." Trump smiled faintly, with no humor in his eyes. "Inspire by closing the church during Hurricane Harvey. While Houston residents slept on the streets, you were in your mansion, posting prayer videos from afar. I remember that image, Joel. The whole country does too." A murmur spread through the auditorium. The cameras panned close to Osteen's face. His smile froze, his eyes losing their familiar confidence. He was about to speak, but Trump didn't give him a chance. You stand on the pulpit every week, talking about humility, but you travel by private jet. You talk about love, but don't open the church doors to the poor. You talk about faith, but live like a Hollywood star. That's distortion, Osteen reacted, his voice higher than usual. You don't understand my world. I don't do politics. I just preach hope. I encourage people to live positively, to believe in themselves. Trump interrupted, his voice deep and clear. No, Joel, you don't encourage them to believe in themselves. You make them believe in you. Believe enough to send money, buy books, buy tickets to hear you talk about God. Faith shouldn't have an entry fee. The auditorium held its breath. Osteen looked down, his hands gripping the edge of the table, his shoulders tense. Trump slowly gathered his documents, but his eyes never left his opponent. I don't have a problem with religion, he said. I have a problem with those who turn faith into a business. You call me a demagogue, but at least I'm not a faith demagogue. The words landed like a hammer blow. Some in the auditorium gasped softly. Osteen tried to force a smile, but it trembled, off-key. You came here to humiliate me, didn't you? He asked, trying to regain his calm voice. Trump replied, his voice as steady as if reading a report. No, Joel, I came here to tell the truth. You can hide behind the microphone, behind the stage, behind those smiles. But tonight, you can't hide behind God's name anymore. The atmosphere in the auditorium grew thick. Every gaze was directed at the stage, where two men faced each other like two opposing poles of faith. One spoke of love, the other of truth. And amid the bright lights, everyone understood. From here, the panel had turned into a confrontation. Trump opened the thick file, flipping each page slowly, the sound of paper rubbing against the microphone clear enough for everyone to hear. He didn't need to look down, just spoke, his voice even and cold. These are reports from the IRS, Lakewood Outreach Foundation records, and subsidiary companies owned by you, Joel. I've had people check every line, and what I found doesn't match what you say on the pulpit every Sunday. Osteen sat up straight, trying to flash a confident smile. Mr. President, those records don't reflect the essence of the work I do. Our church is a non-profit organization. All activities are transparent. Trump nodded slightly, as if he'd heard that 1,000 times. Non-profit, right? He paused, flipping the first page. Last year, your fund reported spending $3.2 million on community programs, but only $700,000 of that actually reached those in need. The rest, he lifted the paper, his voice rising slightly, office operating costs, communications, equipment, and a maintaining lead pastor images item worth nearly $1 million. That's the official name, isn't it? Maintaining lead pastor image. A wave of murmurs swept through the auditorium. Osteen took a deep breath, trying to keep his smile. You're misunderstanding. Those expenses relate to TV production and online programs. We reach millions worldwide, bringing faith and, Trump interrupted, bringing profit. Joel, their faith is your profit. And if I remember correctly, your charity fund hires back the media company you own, meaning you pay from religious funds to yourself. You can call it evangelism, but I call it disguised business. The microphone echoed clearly. A few in the auditorium shook their heads. Others sat silent, looking confused. Osteen furrowed his brow, speaking quickly. There's nothing wrong with using your resources to expand the mission. We've saved more people than any other organization. Trump smiled faintly, his eyes sharp as knives. Saved, he pulled out another sheet. In 2022, you claimed tax exemptions for the entire River Oaks property, worth over $10 million, for religious purposes. But satellite checks show no community activities there, just a tennis court and pool. I guess that's where you serve yourself. The whole hall erupted, not in laughter, but in shock. Osteen leaned toward the microphone, his voice urgent. That's personal property, completely separate from the church. My financial advisors handled it legally. I didn't. Trump tapped his pen lightly on the table, cutting him off. You didn't sign directly, correct, but everything leads back to your signature. You've used religious status to get millions in tax exemptions. That's the truth. A long silence ensued. The stage lights cast on Osteen's face, highlighting the sweat on his forehead. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the awkwardness. "Mr. President," he said, his voice smaller, "you're distorting the truth. I haven't done anything wrong. We help the homeless, provide scholarships, organize relief." Trump leaned forward, his voice low but resonating throughout the auditorium. "You help the homeless by letting them sleep on benches outside the church, while you fly to the Bahamas for Christmas vacation, right?" Osteen fell silent. The atmosphere in the auditorium thickened. On one side was the head of the nation, his voice cold as metal. On the other was the man once seen as the representative of love, now sitting silent, hands gripping the chair arms, eyes avoiding the lens. Some in the audience seats bowed their heads. Others looked at each other, unsure who to believe. Trump gently pushed the stack of documents toward Osteen, his voice steady. "I don't need you to confess. I just need the American people to see the truth, in black and white. You talk about light, Joel, but light always exposes what darkness tries to hide." Osteen didn't respond. He looked down at the file, his lips moving but no sound coming out. On stage, the two men sat in silence, one with a cold face, the other trying to hide panic. Emotions in the auditorium divided, half pity, half anger. And in that atmosphere, everyone understood that the debate had gone beyond religion. This was no longer back and forth words. This was a real confrontation, where a pastor's morality was being dissected before the whole world. Trump sat up straight, his hand lightly flipping another page in the file. He said nothing for a few seconds, just looking straight at Osteen, his eyes calm to the point of coldness. "Joel," he said slowly, "I think America deserves to hear not just from me." He turned to the program moderator, nodding slightly. The giant screen behind the stage suddenly switched from the Faith and Leadership Summit logo to a blurry image of a woman sitting in a small room, dimly lit. Her voice trembled but was clear. "I used to work at Lakewood Church for 7 years, and I can't stay silent anymore." The auditorium erupted. Osteen whipped around to look at the screen, his face paling. The woman appearing was Linda Carmichael, former chief accountant of Lakewood Foundation, a name that Osteen's loyal followers had all heard. "Adjust financial reports, shifting Mr. Osteen's personal expenses to pastoral work categories." I objected, but they said, "If you don't do it, you'll lose your job." Her voice choked. "They called it a charity fund, but I know most of the money went into his private company accounts. JO Media Holdings." Osteen lunged toward the microphone, his voice urgent. "This is fabrication, a disgruntled employee, fired for dishonesty. Don't believe her, folks." Trump didn't turn to look at him. "She's not the only one." "Joel," he said, his voice dropping low, "we verified the information with 3 other employees, all confirming your internal money transfer model." He gestured, and the screen continued to display email copies, titled Reallocation Request, Outreach Expenses, with the electronic signature JO at the bottom. Murmurs exploded in the auditorium. Some covered their mouths. A few stood up to see better. The light reflected on Osteen's face, sweat beading on his forehead. "Those documents were stolen," he yelled. "I never signed any emails like that. Someone forged them." Trump tilted his head, a faint smile flashing. "Interesting," he said, "because we also have the original video from your office computer." The screen switched again, this time to a blurry recording, excerpted from internal security cameras. Osteen standing in a meeting room, speaking to staff. "Make sure the next quarterly report doesn't give the press anything to dig into. If you have to lump some costs into the media fund, just do it. God will understand." The whole hall seemed to explode. Gasps, whispers, then dead silence. Trump sat still, only saying, "And that's your voice, right, Joel?" Osteen shook his head repeatedly, his face flushing red, his voice faltering. "No, that video was edited. No one has the right to use my private images. This is defamation," Trump replied, his voice even, not angry, not raised. "The truth doesn't need rights. It just needs to be seen." He turned to the audience. "What you've just seen isn't politics. It's how someone uses religious status to hide profits." He talks about humility, but controls a media empire worth hundreds of millions. He talks about love, but treats employees like tools. Osteen tried to interject. "I've worked tirelessly for millions of followers. I bring faith. I bring hope. Why do you want to destroy me?" Trump looked straight ahead, his eyes cold as steel. "I don't want to destroy you, Joel. I just want to show everyone who's really selling faith for money." In the auditorium, the murmurs had vanished. All eyes poured onto the stage, where two men sat less than 3 meters apart, but the distance between them seemed like a chasm. Osteen breathed heavily, hands shaking, while Trump was calm as if everything was planned. The screen behind faded to black, like a period at the end of an once revered icon. The moderator was about to speak, but stopped. No one wanted to break the silence enveloping the place. A few of Osteen's followers in the auditorium bowed their heads. Others looked at him with disbelief. Emotions shattered. Shock, anger, disappointment. Trump leaned slightly, his voice dropping low, almost a whisper but resonating through the space. You can fool the audience with lights and music, Joel, but you can't fool the truth. Osteen didn't respond. He looked down at the table, breathing rapidly, his hands gripping the microphone like clinging to something slipping away. The atmosphere in the auditorium was heavy enough to hear the cameras switching lenses, and in that silence, everyone understood. This was no longer a debate. This was the moment. A religious icon collapsed right before the world's eyes. The atmosphere in the auditorium remained thick. After the video ended, the whispers faded, then ceased entirely as Trump placed an old envelope stack in front of him. The paper edges yellowed. He slowly flipped open the first envelope, his voice deep, clear, echoing through the microphone. "These aren't financial papers," he said. "These are letters, hundreds of them, from people who believed in you, Joel. They wrote not to me, but to you. But since you never replied, they sent them to the White House." Trump paused, glancing over the auditorium, then reading slowly word by word. "Dear Pastor Osteen, my name is Martha, living in Florida. I sent $500 from my small savings, believing God would return it tenfold as you said. I'm sick, and I believed. But 6 months now, no one has replied, only medical bills piling up. I'm starting to think maybe God didn't forget me. It's just his people who did." The sound in the room was absolute silence. Trump folded the letter, set it aside, then opened the next. "I'm a veteran. I sent $100 every month to your charity fund. I didn't need anything but a thank you card, but I never got one. After Hurricane Harvey, I went to Lakewood Church for shelter. They said I didn't have a membership card. I left in the rain, soaked. I used to believe in you, but now I just pray for those who still do." A deep inhale sounded somewhere in the auditorium. Osteen bowed his head, eyes on the table, his face usually camera-ready now withdrawn, pale. Trump didn't stop. He opened the third envelope, his voice now not accusatory, but sorrowful. "My son is 9 years old. He watches your program every night. He says you're the best person in the world. He wanted us to go to Houston to meet you. But when we got there, they said we had to buy tickets to the hall. He cried. I didn't know how to tell him that God's people need money to meet." Trump set the letter down, looking straight at Osteen. "These people aren't your enemies. They're your followers. They believed in your words, believed in God through your image, and they've been betrayed." Osteen looked up, his voice trembling, trying to stay calm. "I don't know about those cases. I don't manage everything. Many letters might not have reached me. I can't control every process." Trump cut him off, his voice suddenly sharp and cold. "You can't control, or you don't want to. When the money flows in, you count it very accurately. When the senders come, you don't know." Osteen opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. His face relaxed, then tightened, as if wrestling with emotions. "I always pray for them," he said softly. "I've never wanted anyone to be hurt because of me." Trump sat silent for a few seconds, then leaned forward, his eyes piercing through the stage lights. "But they have been hurt, Joel, and you didn't just make them lose money. You made them lose faith. When a poor person sends their last money to you, they're not buying faith, they're buying hope, and you've sold them an illusion." The entire auditorium was silent. Osteen stared down at the stack of papers in front of him, his hands clenched tightly, his chest heaving. For the first time, he didn't try to force a smile. A flicker of vulnerability passed through his eyes, something between regret and fear. Trump picked up the stack of letters, his voice slow, almost sorrowful. "You talk about love, but you forget that real love doesn't come from a stage. It comes from action. You talk about humility, but you live like a star. You talk about faith, but you've turned it into a commodity." He paused, looking out at the audience. A pastor can fail, but he must not betray, because when you betray, an entire generation of believers will never trust again. The light shone down, enveloping both men in a pale white glow. Osteen sat motionless, his eyes staring into the void ahead. Gone was the confidence, the calm assurance of a man who held faith in his hands. All that remained was a person hearing his own moral indictment, not from an enemy, but from those who once knelt in prayer under the roof he built. Trump maintained his cold gaze as the last letters were folded away. He set them aside, then opened another file, thicker, stiffer. Now, he said, let's talk about the work of God you're so proud of. The screen behind lit up, displaying a diagram of interconnected names: Lakewood Church Inc., Joe Media Holdings, Faith Publishing LLC, Inspire Network Group, Joel Osteen Productions. Beneath each name were numbers and cash flow charts. This isn't the diagram of a church, Trump said, his voice steady. This is the diagram of a media conglomerate. The auditorium stirred. Osteen gave a faint smile, trying to regain his familiar calm tone. Mr. President, those are just organizations supporting our teaching and spreading faith. We only want to reach more people around the world. Trump nodded, then pointed at the screen. Reaching the world by signing advertising deals with Swiss watch companies, German luxury cars, and high-end fashion brands. You call that spreading faith? She flipped to another page. Here's a $4.6 million promotional contract between JO Media Holdings and Artemis Watches. You appeared in their campaign called Time to Believe. Believe in God with a $100,000 watch. A wave of astonishment swept through the hall. Osteen tilted his head slightly, his lips moving as if searching for words. We don't do advertisements. It's just media partnerships to raise funds. Trump cut him off. Raise funds for whom? For you? She flipped another page. Your company, Inspire Network Group, takes 25% of the profits from every ticketed speaking event labeled as a prayer session. On average, a VIP seat costs $500. So where does God sit in your auditorium, Joel? The middle row or on stage with you? Osteen swallowed, his smile fading. You're misunderstanding. I'm not making money for myself. I just want to do better, inspire more. My success is a sign that God is blessing. Trump tapped his finger lightly on the table, his eyes never leaving Osteen. No, Joel, that's not a blessing. That's a transaction. He leaned forward, his voice low but resonant. You've turned prayers into products, the Bible into a marketing tool. Faith isn't a brand, but you've made it a logo. The entire hall fell silent. The stage lights seemed to dim, shining only on the two men facing each other. Trump continued. I'm not saying wealth is a sin, but profiting off faith is betrayal. When people send money, they're not investing in you. They're giving you the purest part of themselves, and you sell it back to them with your signature attached. Osteen looked up, his voice noticeably softer. I never meant to hurt anyone. I just believe success doesn't contradict faith. Trump responded immediately, each word deliberate. It doesn't if it comes from honest work, but you don't build faith. You sell it. You don't preach. You manage a brand. You don't lead souls. You manage customers. A low murmur rose from the auditorium, not in protest, but in shock. Many exchanged glances, as if realizing something they'd vaguely sensed before. The light reflected on Osteen's face, now devoid of a smile. He slumped in his chair, hands clenched tightly, his voice weak. I just did what I thought was right. Trump looked at him, silent for a few seconds, then spoke softly, almost a whisper. If you have to sell tickets to talk about God, maybe you should ask who's really standing in your church, God or you. Osteen didn't respond. His silence spoke louder than any defense. In the auditorium, no one spoke, no one moved. It felt as if everyone was witnessing something collapse, not an organization, but an illusion. Faith had been turned into a product, and the preacher himself no longer believed in what he preached. Osteen sat silent for a long moment after Trump finished. The auditorium remained deathly quiet, with only the faint sound of cameras swiveling in the stillness. Finally, he took a deep breath, trying to regain his usual calm tone. I'm not perfect, he said slowly, eyes avoiding Trump's. If there were any financial oversights, I take responsibility, but that doesn't mean I deceived anyone. I've worked tirelessly to spread faith, to help millions find hope again. Sometimes, in that process, administrative decisions can be misunderstood. Trump didn't react immediately. He leaned back in his chair, observing his opponent like an interrogator, waiting for the accused to reveal more. Financial oversights, he repeated, his voice steady. That's a nice way to put it. But Joel, oversights don't explain taking money from major corporations and calling it donations. Osteen frowned, slightly raising his head as if to argue. But Trump had already opened the laptop in front of him. The screen behind the auditorium lit up, displaying a series of familiar logos: ExxonMobil, Delta Airlines, Boeing, Amazon, JP Morgan Chase. Below each logo were figures ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, labeled as donation for spiritual partnership. Trump said, "These are your spiritual partners, right? Oil companies, banks, and e-commerce giants. Not followers, Joel. Corporate sponsors." A wave of murmurs rose. Osteen tried to smile, his voice noticeably hoarse. "You're distorting the issue. Those are legitimate sponsorships for our community programs. We help the poor, support students." Trump raised his hand to interrupt. "Support students." He pressed a key on the keyboard. The screen shifted to an image of a lavish gala, Osteen and his wife seated with CEOs of 3 major corporations. Above was a sign reading Lakewood Foundation Partnership Night. Champagne glasses, crystal chandeliers, evening gowns, nothing resembling a fundraiser for the poor. Trump said, "This is how you support students. Each ticket costs $5,000. All Wall Street and media people. No students in sight." Osteen closed his eyes, exhaling deeply. "That was just a media event," he said, his voice faltering. "An opportunity to raise funds and make connections." "Right." Trump cut in, "Making connections. Connections between a pastor and tycoons." He leaned toward the microphone, his voice growing stronger, each word clear. "You're no longer God's man, Joel. You're a man of power. You built the national pastor's image to gain corporate patronage. You preach about faith, but you're running a global PR empire where faith is the tool and power is the goal." Scattered applause rose from one corner of the auditorium, quickly stifled by the tension. Osteen tried to stay calm, but his voice trembled. "I'm not seeking power. I just want to positively impact people's lives. You're turning goodwill into sin." Trump leaned forward, his eyes sharp as knives. "Goodwill doesn't need ads on CNBC, Joel. Goodwill doesn't need commercial contracts to exist. But power does, and you know it." He paused, pulling a color photo from the file and holding it up. "This is you with Jeff Wilson, CEO of Frontier Energy, last year at a private dinner in Miami. 3 weeks later, Frontier donated $1.2 million to your fund. That same month, you went on TV saying God blesses those who work to provide energy for America. You think people don't notice the coincidence?" Osteen's hand trembled, shaking his head slightly. "I don't control individual donations." Trump tossed the photo onto the table, his voice echoing through the hall. "You don't need to control it. You just need to know where it's coming from. And you do." The atmosphere grew stiflingly heavy. Osteen bowed his head, gripping the microphone tightly, his knuckles white. His voice was hoarse, weak. "I did everything for God. You can't understand what it's like to be expected to be perfect in front of millions. I'm only human." Trump looked at him for a long moment, then spoke slowly, almost coldly. "No one said you had to be perfect. People just expected you to be honest. But you chose power over truth. You say you serve God, but it seems God serves you quite well." A murmur spread, mixed with the sound of cameras automatically shifting. Osteen raised his hand to wipe his face, his eyes red, his breathing rapid. He started to say something, but his voice caught in his throat. The stage lights shone directly on him, highlighting the sweat on his forehead. Trump watched the scene, silent for a few seconds, then tilted his head and said softly, "If you want to save others' souls, Joel, start by saving your own." Osteen closed his eyes, saying nothing. The entire auditorium was silent, so quiet you could hear the faint rustle of papers in the file. The emotion had moved beyond debate. This was no longer an interrogation, but the public collapse of an icon. And as the lights shone on Osteen's bowed face, everyone understood that the power he once saw as a blessing was beginning to consume him. Trump sat silent for a few seconds after Osteen bowed his head, as if letting the silence speak for itself. Then he reached out, pulling the tablet beside him closer. "I think," he said, his voice slow but carrying through the microphone, "it's time we talk in numbers, not emotions." The screen behind him lit up, displaying a bank statement with small, detailed text, each number magnified for the entire auditorium to see. "This is the account of Lakewood Outreach Foundation, the main charity you run," Trump said, his index finger tapping lightly on the screen. And this, he pointed to another column, is the account of JO Media Holdings, the media company you own. The light reflected on Osteen's face. He furrowed his brow, shaking his head slightly, but said nothing. Trump continued, his voice steady like someone reading an indictment. Over the past 6 months, more than $4,200,000 were transferred from this charity to your company through 3 media service fees. $4 million from followers, people who believed they were helping the poor, not helping you buy more real estate. A wave of murmurs swept through the hall. Osteen bowed his head lower, his lips twitching as if searching for a defense. Those are legal contracts, he said softly, his voice trembling. The church and my media company collaborate on nationwide broadcasts. Everything is transparent. Nothing is wrong. Trump tilted his head, his eyes sharp as knives. Transparent? Then why did your company use that money to buy 2 new Range Rovers and a Colorado mansion titled to Lakewood's CFO? I have the documents here. He lifted a thick file, flipping it open for the cameras. Each transaction is initialed with JO, your signature. Osteen flinched, his eyes widening. I don't remember signing any documents like that. It could have been my staff. We've checked. Trump cut in. And to avoid debate, I'm bringing in someone to confirm this. He signaled the moderator. On the large screen, a live feed appeared. The face of a middle-aged man, wearing glasses, looking weary. This is Mark Peterson, Trump said, former head of Lakewood Media's technical department. He worked for Osteen for 8 years. Mark greeted the audience, his voice trembling but clear. I managed the server system storing financial records. I can confirm those transactions are real. I received orders from superiors to delete original data and replace it with edited versions, but I backed it up. I sent the originals to an independent audit team, and now they're in the president's hands. The auditorium erupted in murmurs. Osteen stood up, his voice rising, full of anger. That's a lie. He's a disgruntled employee, fired for breaching confidentiality. He's not trustworthy. Mark looked straight into the camera, unflinching. I wasn't fired. I quit because I couldn't keep working for an organization that talks about God, but lives by deceit. All the data is backed up, time-stamped, verified. You can deny my words, but you can't deny your own electronic signature, Pastor. Osteen stepped back, his face pale. He gripped the microphone tightly, his voice choked. I didn't know about that. I didn't mean to. Trump looked at him, neither angry nor pitying. You didn't know, or you didn't want to know. He turned to the auditorium. Everyone's seen it. This isn't just management oversights. This is systematic fraud, done under the guise of faith. The entire hall fell silent. Everyone looked at the screen, where the numbers were clear, undeniable. Transfers, dates, recipients, account numbers. The cold light shone on Osteen, draining the life from his face. Trump continued, his voice slow and firm. I don't need anyone to judge for me. These numbers speak for themselves. You turned people's trust into capital, devotion into a market. Faith isn't a stock exchange, Joel, but you've made it a financial tool. Osteen sank into his chair, his eyes red, his hands trembling. I never wanted this. I just wanted to build something good. Trump didn't interrupt, just looked at him, then spoke softly but resonantly through the auditorium. People don't need promises anymore, Joel. They need truth, and the truth is right here, in every number, every transaction. The entire auditorium held its breath. No one spoke. The charts still glowed on the screen, reflecting on the faces of the 2 men. One cold as a judge, the other bowed like the accused. The atmosphere was thick. No applause, no whispers, only the stillness of a great fall, when the icon of faith was exposed by the very numbers he thought would protect him. Trump closed the thick file, pushing it aside, as if the evidence had said enough. He looked up, his eyes no longer sharp, but somber, resolute. I think it's time we stop talking about money, Joel, he said, his deep voice carrying through the microphone, and talk about what you preach every week, faith. No one in the auditorium dared move. Osteen sat there, his shoulders trembling slightly, his eyes clouded under the stage lights. Trump looked directly at him, his voice calm to the point of chilling. You've said for years that faith is love, hope, light. But I ask you, Joel, if faith is truly light, why does the light in your church go out when people need it most? Osteen looked up, his lips moving, but Trump didn't wait for an answer. He turned to the auditorium, his voice steady and sure. I remember Hurricane Harvey in 2017. This city was underwater. People lost their homes, lost everything. They came to Lakewood Church, believing it would open as a shelter. But what did they see? Locked doors, lights off, a sign outside the gate saying, "We are temporarily closed due to weather conditions." Murmurs rose. Many in the auditorium bowed their heads, recalling the scene. Thousands of refugees wandering in the rain, while the massive church, capable of holding 16,000, stood silent. Trump continued, his voice now tinged with sadness. People stood outside, looking up at the glowing dome of the church, believing God was inside, but God wasn't there. Only you. Osteen shook his head slightly. His voice choked. "We opened the doors later. We couldn't ensure safety right when the waters rose." Later, Trump interrupted. After the press criticized. After the nation was outraged. When you couldn't stay silent anymore. True faith doesn't need to be prodded, Joel. True faith acts even when there are no cameras. The auditorium was deathly silent. Osteen looked down at the table, his hands clasped tightly, fingertips white. Trump didn't stop, his voice now slow, each word striking like a hammer on a judge's bench. "You say faith is forgiveness, humility, love. But when people are hungry, you preach patience. When they lose their homes, you preach hope. When they beg for help, you live stream. You talk about God, but you're never there with them." A chill spread through the auditorium. The cameras panned across the silent faces in the audience. Osteen took a shallow breath, his voice soft, like a confession. "I did my best. No one can be everywhere." Trump tilted his head, his eyes sharp again. "But you could open the doors. You just had to do what's right. But you chose what's convenient. You chose to keep the floors dry while people lost everything." He paused for a beat, then said slowly, "You're not a pastor, Joel. You're a property manager. And when faith becomes property, it's dead." The entire hall was silent. Trump sat still, his eyes never leaving Osteen. He continued, his voice lowering, almost like a confiding to the nation. "I'm not perfect. I can be wrong. I can be hated. But when people suffer, I don't lock the doors. I go to them. I look them in the eye. That's what a leader must do. Not for the photo op, but because it's responsibility." Osteen looked up, his eyes red, lips trembling. "You're judging me by your standards, not God's." Trump raised an eyebrow. "I don't need to pretend to be God. I just say what people see. And what they see is a man preaching about love, but not knowing how to love. Talking about truth, but not living it. Your faith is a speech, not an action." A sigh echoed from the back row. Osteen gripped his hands tighter, his face no longer radiating its usual confidence. It was as if every layer of pretense was being stripped away, leaving behind the real man, vulnerable, scared, confused. Trump lowered his voice, almost a whisper. "People used to believe in you. They saw you as a symbol of goodness. But faith isn't something to display. It lives in how we treat others, not in what we say on stage. And you forgot that." Osteen didn't respond. He stared down at his hands, his shoulders trembling slightly, his breathing heavy. For a few seconds, silence blanketed the room. No one dared move. No one spoke. Trump lifted his head, scanned the auditorium, then turned back to Osteen. "You once said God opens paths for those who trust," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "But maybe today, God is opening a path for you to face yourself." A small burst of applause rose, then quickly faded. Osteen sat still, his gaze unfocused. The entire auditorium looked at him, no longer as an icon, but as a man crumbling. The collapse wasn't just financial or reputational. It was happening within, in the heart of someone who had lost the true meaning of faith. Trump sat silent, for a few seconds, as if letting the silence gnaw at what had just transpired. Then he leaned down, pulling a familiar blue-covered book from the file in front of him. The light caught the gold-embossed title, "Your Best Life Now," Joel Osteen. He held the book up high, his voice calm but laden with intent. "This sold over 8 million copies, right, Joel? You called it God's teachings through a man. So let's see what God taught you." Osteen looked up, his voice hoarse. "I wrote it to inspire, so people could know they can live happily and be blessed." Trump nodded slightly. "Inspiration, or a guide to getting rich." He flipped a few pages, then stopped. Page 112. "When you sow a seed with faith, God will make it bloom into a prosperous harvest. Give more. Because the more you give, the more God returns tenfold." He looked up, staring straight at Osteen. "Sounds nice. But tell me, How much of that harvest went to the people, and how much went to your bank account? Osteen opened his mouth slightly, but said nothing. Trump continued, his voice steady, like reading an indictment. Page 201. Success is a sign of faith. If you're not rich, maybe you haven't believed enough. He set the book down on the table, the sound of the cover hitting the wood ringing sharply. Faith isn't a trade, Joel. You taught them that poverty is their fault, that God chooses who's rich and who suffers. But if that's true, your God must be an investor. A few in the auditorium nodded slightly. Others clenched their fists. Trump stood, taking a step toward Osteen, his voice low but resonant. You preach give to receive, but when they gave, what did they get? A thank you email, a recorded prayer, while you bought another mansion and a private jet. He paused, his gaze firm. That's not faith, Joel. That's business. Osteen swallowed hard, his shoulders hunching, his voice soft. I just wanted to help them believe in something better. I didn't force anyone to do anything. Trump leaned toward the microphone, his voice sharp as steel. You didn't need to force them. You just made them believe that if they didn't give money, God would forget them. You made them fear poverty instead of teaching them to love. The atmosphere in the auditorium grew stifling. Everyone held their breath. Trump flipped the book open again, reading on page 178. If you maintain a positive mindset, God will open doors to success. He looked around the auditorium. And if they stayed positive but remained poor, would you give back the faith you took from them? Osteen bowed his head. The light shone on his hair, creating a faint halo-like illusion. You don't understand. I was just trying to help them believe in themselves. In God, Trump interrupted, his voice deep and cold. I understand. You helped them believe in something you don't live. You wrote books about humility, then stepped on stage like a pop star. You taught that wealth is a blessing, then used that blessing to buy more power. You turned God into a promotional tool, and when they're disappointed, you say it's lack of faith. You don't preach, you sell hope. A long silence enveloped the room. Osteen looked up, his eyes wet, but he didn't speak. All the defenses, the arguments, seemed to vanish along with the applause he was once accustomed to hearing. Trump looked at him, then set the book down on the table. People read this book to find God, he said slowly. But what they found was your image. And that's the greatest sin, because when they're disappointed in you, they don't just lose faith in a man. They lose faith in God. No one spoke. Every camera focused on Osteen. He sat still, his hands clasped tightly, eyes down, his back hunched, as if the weight of his own words was pressing on his shoulders. Trump sat back, his voice softening but still resonant. When a preacher forgets his own sermon, God sends someone to remind him. Today, it's not me judging you. Your own words are doing that. The stage lights dimmed, leaving a shadow between the two men. Osteen didn't speak, didn't move, didn't look up. And in that moment, the Houston auditorium became a moral courtroom, where the man once standing on the pulpit was now judged by his own sermon, not by the public, but by his conscience. Trump sat back, his eyes on Osteen for a few seconds, then turned to the technical coordinator. Play the next segment, he said, his voice calm but firm as steel. The large screen behind immediately lit up. The entire auditorium turned to look, the light reflecting on silent faces. The first image was an aerial drone shot of Lakewood Church's massive dome, golden lights gleaming like a palace, spacious VIP seats, a red carpet down the aisle, and an exclusive diamond partner area with leather chairs, air conditioning, and personal beverage service. Trump said nothing for a few seconds. He let the audience look, let them understand. Then he spoke, soft but far-reaching. This is what's called God's house. But look at it. What's inside? Regular tickets, gold tickets, platinum tickets. People have to pay to pray. You call this a church, Joel, or a theater? Osteen closed his eyes for a second, his face paling. Trump continued, I'm not against beauty or success, but when faith requires a ticket booth, when people have to pay to get close to the pulpit, that's no longer worship. It's a performance. The screen shifted. Images of Osteen's private River Oaks estate, a large pool, tennis court, high fences, intricately carved iron gates. The camera panned slowly to the garage, where two Rolls-Royces and a Bentley sat side by side. In the background, A lush garden with a gold cross-shaped fountain. A soft sigh rose from the audience. Trump spoke, his voice lowering. I'm not saying a pastor has to be poor, but when you live like a king while your believers borrow money to donate, the issue isn't faith anymore, it's power. The auditorium began to murmur. A woman in the middle row bowed her head, her hands trembling. An older man shook his head, lips moving. Sheepdo, Eve, in him, Trump signaled. The screen shifted again, this time to behind-the-scenes footage of Osteen's live sermons, technicians adjusting lights, camera crews rehearsing angles, a TV director shouting, "Zoom in, capture the emotional moment." Images overlapped between Osteen on stage and people outside kneeling in prayer before TV screens. This, Trump said, is how faith is mass-produced. Every tear, every prayer, staged. You turn sacred emotions into a tool to keep an audience. Faith is no longer something people live. It's something they watch. Osteen bowed his head, gripping the microphone tightly. That's not true, he said softly. People need hope. We just make them feel closer. Trump turned, looking straight at him, his eyes cold. Hope doesn't need props, Joel. God doesn't need a director. The words shattered the atmosphere in the auditorium. The murmurs turned into louder discussions. A few people in the front row stood, shaking their heads in anger. We sent money, trusted, prayed, one shouted. While you lived like a king. Another voice echoed from the back. You're not God's man, you're your own man. The moderator stepped up to calm things down, but Trump raised a hand to signal silence. He continued, his voice steady but heavy with weight. I'm not happy saying these things. I know millions found comfort in your sermons, but now they need the truth. You didn't bring them closer to God. You brought them closer to their credit cards. Osteen looked up, his eyes sunken. I never meant to hurt anyone, he said, his voice faltering. I just wanted to give them hope. If anyone was misunderstood, I'm sorry. Trump didn't interrupt. He let the silence linger, then said softly, almost with pity, hope doesn't need apologies, Joel. It needs honesty. The screen changed one last time. A satellite image, showing the vast expanse of the church and Osteen's personal properties, contrasted with the poor neighborhoods around. The contrast itself was a verdict. In the auditorium, the atmosphere shifted. The initial silence of shock gave way to a suppressed wave of anger. People looked at each other. Some left their seats, tears in their eyes. No one saw this as a TV show anymore. It had become a moral reckoning, where faith was laid bare. Osteen tried to smile, but it trembled, distorted. He reached to adjust the microphone, but said no more. His entire body seemed to sink under the weight of thousands of gazes. The face once familiar on screens was now pale, eyes clouded, hands trembling as they gripped the table's edge. Trump sat there, needing no more words. He only said softly, just enough for the microphone to catch. A church shouldn't be a place where people come to admire luxury. It should be where they find humanity. And today, we've only seen one of those. A long silence enveloped the auditorium. No one clapped, no one spoke. Only Osteen's heavy breathing echoed faintly through the microphone, blending into the thick air of disillusionment. And in that moment, the image of him, the pastor once celebrated, the icon of prosperity faith, collapsed completely before America's eyes. Trump remained still as the angry whispers faded. He said nothing for a while, just flipping through a few pages of the file on the table, then pulling out a thick white envelope, sealed with a government stamp. The audience held their breath as he held it up, his voice deep and slow. So far, he said, we've seen properties, money transfers, and lavish images. But there's one more thing, something you can't call a misunderstanding. This is an internal email from Lakewood Media and J.O. Holdings, sent the week after the Hurricane Harvey video sparked outrage. The auditorium was deathly silent. Trump opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of color-printed papers, laying each one on the table like a judge preparing the final evidence. This is correspondence between Joel Osteen, the communications director, and the PR team, he said. I'll read it verbatim, because no commentary is needed. His voice carried evenly through the microphone. The negative response is driving viewership through the roof. Let them talk. Every controversy is a promotional opportunity. The more criticism, the higher the donations. Push the faith under fire clip and buy more YouTube ads. We'll turn this crisis into a nationwide prayer campaign. A soft gasp rose from the auditorium. Trump looked up, his eyes fixed on Osteen, then read on. Those attacking me don't understand, but they're helping spread the mission. Every time they criticize, we We sell a few thousand more books. God works in ways no one expects. Trump set the paper down, his voice now cold. These aren't the words of a misunderstood man. These are the words of a calculating one. You didn't care about the people, Joel. You cared about the views. Osteen's face paled, his lips trembling. That's an internal email, taken out of context, he said faintly, his voice weak. We were just trying to turn negativity into positivity. We wanted to use the crisis to encourage people to pray. Trump cut him off, his voice firm. No, you wanted to use it to make money, and everyone here sees that. Prayer doesn't need a media campaign. Faith doesn't need a hashtag. God doesn't need a sales rep. Osteen bowed his head, his trembling hand on the microphone, but he had nothing left to say. His face was ashen, his eyes fixed on the papers before him, where bolded text reflected his own conscience. Trump stood slowly, the stage lights focused on him, illuminating his dark suit, his expressionless face radiating authority. This is the last thing I want to say, Joel, he said, his voice carrying through the auditorium. You can fool viewers with pretty stories. You can profit from their trust, but you can't fool God. And tonight, you can't fool America either. He held the email stack aloft. The truth doesn't need to hide behind religion. It shines like the sun. Only lies need to hide in stage lights. The entire auditorium was silent. A few people had tears in their eyes. A woman in the front row clutched her Bible tightly. Osteen sat still, not looking up. Sweat ran down his temple, his shoulders trembling slightly, as if trying to swallow something. Trump looked down at him, his voice softer but clear, each word falling like stone. You say God blessed you with success, but God doesn't measure faith by bank balances. You think faith is an asset. I think faith is a responsibility. You think prayer is a product. I think it's a promise between man and conscience. A long silence passed. The air in the auditorium thickened until heartbeats could be heard. Osteen closed his eyes, his lips moving as if praying, but no one believed it was a real prayer anymore. The screen behind dimmed, leaving only the final email line. Let them talk. It helps us. Trump pointed to the line, his voice cold as metal. Yes, Joel, they're talking. But today it's not helping you anymore. Osteen lowered his gaze, his hands falling limp. No smile, no air of sanctity, no trace of the pastor once celebrated. He was just a lonely man, sitting under blinding lights with nothing left to cling to. Trump took a deep breath, then delivered his closing words with steady conviction. You say you represent God, but God doesn't need a spokesperson. He just needs the truth. And the truth is the only light left in this room. The lights dimmed. No one clapped. No one spoke. Everyone just sat, watching the man once called America's pastor bow his head in silence. In the front row, a few people pulled out their phones, but no one recorded. Nobody wanted to capture a moment they knew would haunt them for a long time. Trump set the file down on the table, turned, and walked away from the microphone. Each step echoed on the wooden floor, like the final strike of a gavel. Osteen remained seated, staring at the lingering email line on the screen, like a wound that couldn't be erased. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage, and in that absolute silence, everyone understood that Pastor Joel Osteen, the icon of flashy faith, of belief packaged and sold under stage lights, had officially collapsed. Not because of money, not because of the media, but because of the truth. Something he once thought he could control, finally spoke. Osteen sat motionless, under the dimming stage lights, his hands limp on the table, his empty gaze fixed on the scattered papers before him. Every murmur, every breath, every rustle of paper had vanished. The auditorium held only a heavy silence, like the calm after a storm. After a long pause, he finally spoke, his voice soft, hoarse, and broken. I don't know what to say anymore, he uttered, his voice trembling. I never thought things would go this far. He looked up, scanning the room, his red eyes lost among the gazes of thousands. I started with a simple desire to give hope, to inspire people to believe in something better. But then, I got caught up in everything. I saw people love me, saw the church grow, saw the money pour in, and I told myself it was a sign of blessing, that God was rewarding me. But I was wrong. His voice broke on the last sentence. Trump didn't speak, just watched, his eyes no longer sharp but calm, even tinged with sadness. Osteen swallowed, continuing as if confessing to his own conscience. I thought I was still in control, but the truth is, fame controlled me. I forgot what it meant to serve. I forgot that people came to God, not to me, and I let them believe in me more than they believed in him. In the auditorium, some bowed their heads, others quietly wiped tears. The followers who once trusted him, now witnessing their pastor admit the very thing they feared most, that their faith had been bought and sold. Trump remained silent, but his expression shifted. The cold sharpness was gone, replaced by a mix of understanding and disappointment. He spoke softly, without needing the microphone, yet his voice carried evenly. At least you had the courage to tell the truth. Not everyone can do that. Osteen looked over, his eyes brimming with tears. You don't understand, he said, his voice faltering. When millions of people look at you like a saint, you start to believe you really are one. People want to hear what makes them feel better, and I gave them that, even when I knew it wasn't entirely true. They didn't need the truth. They needed an illusion, and I gave it to them, until I believed the illusion myself. Trump stayed silent for a few seconds, then spoke slowly, each word clear, as if carving into the air. The truth always finds its way, Joel. No matter how you hide it under lights, cover it with sweet words, or wrap it in gold and silver, it will come back, often when you least expect it. Osteen closed his eyes, tears falling onto his hands. Maybe God sent you here, he said, his voice breaking, not to humiliate me, but to remind me how far I've strayed. Trump leaned forward, his gaze stern. No one can destroy you, Joel. You did that yourself. I just held up a mirror for you to see. And the hardest part is, you don't have to look at the numbers or the wealth. You have to look at the man in the mirror, the one who forgot the real reason he started. A wave of silence spread through the auditorium. No one dared cough or speak. Only the sound of Osteen's heavy breathing through the microphone and the faint tap of Trump's pen on the table could be heard. Osteen gave a faint, bitter smile. I used to tell people they could live their best life now, he whispered, but I never thought I was living so poorly myself. I taught others to believe in miracles, while I stopped believing in anything real. Trump responded, his voice now softer, more like a warning than a condemnation. God doesn't need perfect people, but he needs real ones. And maybe today, you're starting to become real again. The words made Osteen bow his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. No one could tell if he was crying or praying. The stage lights were now just a faint golden streak, illuminating his gaunt face. His hands, once so accustomed to holding a microphone, now trembling, unsure where to rest. Trump turned to the auditorium, his voice lowering, carrying a tone of reflection. We all get lost sometimes, he said. The difference is who has the courage to admit it and turn back. He, Trump glanced at Osteen, has lost his image, his adoration. But if he can face the truth, maybe he'll find something more important, his soul. A gentle breeze passed through, the stage curtain swaying slightly. The auditorium remained silent, but the tension had eased. The emotion now was a mix of judgment and compassion. Osteen bowed his head lower, while Trump sat back, quiet, his gaze distant. In that stillness, people didn't just see a pastor fall, but the fragility of faith, of humanity before temptation. The fierce confrontation had turned into a moment of repentance, where no one won, no one lost. Only the truth stood firm in the light. Trump sat upright, hands clasped, his eyes fixed on the man bowing his head before him. There was no longer anger, nor a victorious smile. His voice now held only the calm of someone who had walked through a storm and seen its aftermath. He waited a few more seconds, letting the silence finish what words could not. Then, he spoke, his voice deep, steady, and far-reaching. Joel, Trump said, I didn't come here to embarrass you. I came to say what America needs to hear. That true faith doesn't need a stage, doesn't need glamour, doesn't need applause. True faith lives in actions, not words. He paused, his eyes not leaving Osteen. You call yourself a man of God, but you forgot that God isn't on television, in mansions, or on private jets. He's in the people you overlooked, in the tears of those you say you love. Osteen didn't respond. His shoulders trembled slightly, the stage lights glinting off his sweat-soaked hair. He sat there, small under the spotlight, no longer the pastor who once captivated audiences with his smile and soothing voice. Trump continued, his voice growing deeper, tinged with sadness. Religion isn't a cloak you wear to gain respect. It's a flame to light the way when people are lost. But when that flame is used to shine on your own face, it's no longer light. it becomes darkness. Each of his words fell like a bell in an empty church. Every eye was fixed on the stage. There were no longer an audience or a moderator, just two men, one speaking, one silent. Trump stood, taking a step forward. "I'm not a preacher," he said, "and I don't claim to be perfect. But I know one thing. The truth doesn't need to be justified with sacred titles, because when people use religion to hide lies, that religion is dead." He turned to the auditorium. For years, he spoke of love, humility, faith. But tonight, we saw the opposite. We saw a man who used faith to escape the truth. And when the truth came, everything crumbled. Osteen remained still, unmoving. Thousands watched, unsure whether to feel pity or anger. The slanted light illuminated his face, sunken eyes, wet lashes, the forced smile gone. He no longer tried to hold the microphone, no longer sought to speak. He just sat, silent, as if realizing that all defenses had become meaningless. Trump stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from the table. His voice was low but clear, ringing through the microphone. "You said, if you hold on to faith, God will open a path for you." And he did. He opened a path, but not for you to go further, for you to look back. Today, that path ends here, in this light, in this truth. And the question isn't what you'll say anymore. It's what you'll do with what you've just heard. A long silence enveloped the room. Trump lowered his voice, almost a whisper. "You can keep performing, or you can truly kneel." Osteen trembled, his lips moving as if to speak, but no words came. Finally, he bowed his head deeply, hands clenching tightly, then slowly collapsing onto the table. The light glinted off the gold ring on his finger, a symbol of power, now just a lonely piece of jewelry in the silence. Trump stepped back, his gaze no longer harsh, but heavy with the weight of witnessing a soul's collapse. "You said God gave you talent to inspire," he said, his voice slowing. "But maybe he gave you this fall to teach you humility. Maybe he's teaching us all that lesson." A soft breeze passed through the auditorium, stirring the curtains behind the stage. No one knew if it was real or an illusion, but someone whispered, "It's like God's sigh." Trump looked around, then spoke his final words, firm without raising his voice. "Faith isn't a promise, it's a responsibility. And the truth, always the only thing left standing, even when people fall." The words landed like a judgment, but also like a prayer. The auditorium didn't applaud. People just stood, silent. Osteen remained seated, head bowed. The light from the ceiling illuminated his face, revealing every wrinkle, every sign of weariness. No longer the pastor of the masses, no longer the icon of spiritual success, just a man, exposed and small, sitting in the light of the stage he once built. Trump turned, walking slowly toward the back of the stage. Each step echoed firmly, decisively. As the backstage door closed, the light on Osteen faded, leaving only a small beam on the empty table. In that moment, everyone understood the confrontation was over. There was nothing left to argue, nothing left to defend. An icon had collapsed completely, not by power, but by the very light he once claimed to shine on others. And in that silence, one thing echoed through the auditorium. The truth always finds its way, even if it must walk through the ashes of lies. Trump stood still at the edge of the stage. The white light slanted down, blanketing the silent auditorium. No applause, no thanks, just a thick, heavy silence, like ashes after a storm. He looked around, thousands of people still standing, each face marked with a different emotion: shock, contemplation, regret. Across the table, Joel Osteen sat with his head bowed, hands clenched, his pale face caught in the light. Trump said nothing more. He nodded, left the microphone, and turned away. His footsteps echoed steadily, striking the wooden floor, each sound sharp and final. As he disappeared behind the curtains, the light dimmed, leaving only a faint glow on the empty table, where a confrontation had unfolded, not just between two men, but between truth and deceit. The auditorium remained still. No one left. Some bowed their heads in prayer. Others stared at the stage, as if trying to comprehend what had happened. In that space, everyone felt the same thing. They hadn't just witnessed a debate, but the fall of an icon and the rise of truth. Osteen sat motionless, his shoulders sagged, his gaze empty. He was no longer the pastor of the masses, now just a small man amid the ruins of his own spirit. The dim light shone on his hair, strands seeming to silver under it. After a long moment, he slowly removed the microphone from his collar, placing it gently on the table. No more words to say. He stood, walking slowly through the rows of the audience.
Yad.
Every eye followed, no longer with anger, but with pity. An elderly woman whispered as he passed, "God will forgive." Osteen paused, nodding slightly, his lips trembling as if to say thank you, then left the auditorium. The door closed behind him, the hinges faint creak like a final bell. In the auditorium, the light faded, only a few golden rays filtering through the glass windows. People remained seated, silent. A young man turned to his son beside him, saying softly, "True faith isn't in words, son. It's in what we do." The boy nodded, eyes fixed on the empty stage. Outside, the sky turned to dusk. The last sunlight spilled through the glass walls, illuminating the polished stone floor. A gentle breeze stirred, sending dust sparkling in the air. In the distance, Lakewood Church glowed in the red evening light. A cracked window, high up, let a single beam shine inside, onto the silver cross in the empty auditorium. No music, no prayers, just light and silence. That light, simple, faint, but steadfast, became a symbol. It didn't blaze like stage lights, but it was real. It didn't boast or speak, it just existed. And in its quiet existence, people began to understand. True faith doesn't need display. It lives in action, in honesty, in the courage to face mistakes. Trump stepped out from backstage, where technicians were packing up equipment. He said nothing, only glanced out the door, where the sunset painted the sky orange and purple. He took a deep breath, then walked out slowly. No cameras, no audience, just the wind, the light, and the distant hum of the city returning to its rhythm. A few people outside the convention center recognized him but didn't approach. They just watched, silent. Trump passed them, nodding in greeting, then kept walking, his posture straight and sure. Something in his calm demeanor made people feel he wasn't just leaving a debate, but a moral battle that had changed even him. From afar, church bells rang 3 short chimes. The sound carried through the wind, through the glass walls, into the empty auditorium. Those who remained looked up. No one spoke, but they all understood. The chimes weren't just bidding farewell to a man, but awakening a realization. In the fading light, the church stood empty but peaceful. The silver cross caught the sunlight through the cracked window, gleaming quietly. There, with no glamour, no stage, only truth remained, raw but pure. Trump paused before his car, glancing back into the distance. He didn't smile, didn't speak. Then he got in. The door closed, carrying with it the silence of a nation looking at itself. The breeze stirred, lifting dust on the steps where thousands had stood. The day's last light shone through the broken glass, touching the silver cross, making it glimmer as if alive again. No sermons echoed. No one needed to say more, for everyone understood. True faith lies not in words or images, but in actions and truth. And when people have the courage to live that truth, however painful, they truly find God's light. The story Joel Osteen calls Trump a demagogue and criminal. Trump's clapback leaves him speechless, is not just a clash between two prominent figures, a president and a pastor, but a microcosm of the complex relationship between religion, power, and truth in modern America. From the moment Joel Osteen was exposed for locking the church doors during Houston's struggle in Hurricane Harvey, to the internal emails revealing he saw controversy as a revenue opportunity, the story lays bare how faith is commercialized, packaged, promoted, and sold as entertainment. Meanwhile, Trump's silent exit from the stage, without applause, symbolizes the triumph of truth, but also a warning that justice comes not from power, but from the courage to speak truth amid a crowd. What makes this story powerful is not just the financial evidence or exposing videos, but Osteen's spiritual collapse. The moment he confessed, "I let people believe in me more than in God." In that moment, the story transcends criticism, becoming a public repentance for America, a nation that sometimes worships image over true value. The lesson for Americans is this: faith lies not in eloquent words or glamorous spokespeople, but in honest actions, however small. And for leaders, political, religious, or economic, the message is clear. The truth always finds its way, and when the light shines, no fame, no wealth, no crowd can obscure it. Thank you for following this story to the end, where truth and faith meet in the light. Please subscribe and turn on notifications, because in the next video, we'll continue exploring the secrets behind America's seemingly holiest faces.